My name is Adaline Marsh and I am 32 years old. 8 months ago, my mother walked into the Granger County Family Court in Knoxville, Tennessee, carrying a leather portfolio the color of dried blood, and told a family court judge that I was an unfit guardian for my 7-year-old nephew, Eli, a child who had been sleeping in the bedroom down the hall from mine for 2 years, a child who had learned to read in my living room, a child who called me Addie and kept a collection of smooth river stones on the windowsill beside his bed because I had taught him that some things are worth keeping. She had 4 typed pages, 2 character witnesses, and a family therapist she had retained 3 weeks prior. What she did not have, what she could not have known about, was the envelope my Aunt Rosemary had left with her attorney in Maryville, Tennessee, 18 months before she died. A sealed envelope, notarized, dated, and accompanied by a handwritten letter that began, "When the time comes, and it will come, give this to Adaline." I did not cry when my mother read her statement into the court record. I did not flinch when she used the word unstable. I sat at the petitioner's table with my hands flat on the surface in front of me and counted the water rings on the wood, 3 of them, pale and overlapping, and I waited. Before I tell you what happened when my attorney opened that envelope, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It means more than you know. And drop your city and the time where you are in the comments below. I genuinely love reading those. Now let me take you back to where this all started, to a small house in Maryville, Tennessee, and the summer I turned 19, when my family first showed me exactly what kind of people they were willing to be. Maryville sits about 16 miles south of Knoxville, tucked against the edge of the Great Smoky Mountains in a way that makes the sky look lower than it is, like the clouds are leaning in to listen. Population around 30,000. The kind of town where the high school football schedule gets posted in the window of the hardware store and the same 3 families have run the county commission since 1987. I grew up on Caldwell Road in the house my grandfather built with his brother in 1961. 2 stories, white clapboard, a front porch that sagged on the left side and had sagged that way for as long as I could remember. My mother, Renee Marsh, grew up in that house. She inherited it when my grandfather died the year I started middle school. My mother was a woman who organized her feelings the way some people organize their closets, by hiding the mess behind something that looked presentable. She kept the house clean. She kept her hair done. She kept her voice level in public and her opinions sharp in private. To the women at First Presbyterian she was Renee, who brought the best deviled eggs and chaired the hospitality committee. To me she was the woman who once told my sister she had our grandmother's eyes and told me I had our grandfather's stubbornness. Like stubbornness was a defect and beauty was a gift and neither of us had earned what we were given. My sister Darla was 4 years older. She was the kind of beautiful that people commented on out loud, the kind that made strangers say things in grocery store lines. My mother loved Darla the way you love something you're proud of, publicly, loudly, with photographs. She loved me the way you love something you feel responsible for. Obligatory and a little burdened. My Aunt Rosemary was my mother's older sister by 7 years. She had never married, never wanted to, lived in a small stone house on the other side of Maryville with a garden that took up half her yard and a tabby cat named Biscuit who outlived 2 of her neighbors. Rosemary taught high school English for 31 years at Heritage High. She had read everything. She remembered everything. And she was the only person in my family who ever sat across from me at a table and asked what I thought about something and then actually waited for the answer. When I was 12, she gave me a copy of a book I won't name here because it doesn't matter, but she wrote in the front cover, "For Adaline, who sees more than she lets on." Don't stop seeing. I kept that book. I still have it. It's on the shelf in the hallway, 2 feet from where Eli hangs his backpack every afternoon when he comes home from school. Rosemary used to say one thing to me so often it became the kind of sentence I heard in her voice even when she wasn't in the room. She said, "The people who try to shrink you have already decided you're bigger than they can handle. That's their problem. Don't make it yours." I was 19 when Darla got pregnant. She was 23, unmarried, working part-time at a dental office in Knoxville, and the father, a man named Troy Pelham who sold insurance and drove a truck with a cracked taillight, was not interested in being involved. My mother's response to this was swift and architectural. She rearranged the entire family structure to accommodate Darla the way a house gets rearranged around a new piece of furniture. The spare room became a nursery. The conversation at every dinner became Darla. The worry, the planning, the phone calls at all hours, all of it orbited Darla. I was finishing my first year of community college, studying early childhood education, working 22 hours a week at a daycare center on Montvale Road. I paid my own gas. I bought my own textbooks secondhand from a woman on Facebook Marketplace who lived in Oak Ridge. I did not ask for much because I had learned early that asking was not the same as receiving, at least not in our house. Eli was born on March 4th, a Tuesday, at 6:47 in the morning. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Dark hair, my grandfather's forehead, a cry that sounded like a question. I was in the waiting room when he was born. I held him for the first time at 8:15 a.m. And something settled in my chest that had never settled before, like a drawer that had always stuck finally sliding closed the way it was supposed to. Darla loved Eli the way she loved most things, intensely, briefly, and with a low tolerance for the harder parts. She was not a bad person. I want to say that clearly. She was a person who had been arranged her whole life by someone else and had never quite learned how to arrange herself. She loved her son. She just did not know how to be consistent about it. For the first 3 years of Eli's life, my mother kept things together through sheer force of organization. She watched Eli when Darla worked. She scheduled the pediatrician appointments. She bought the car seat and the high chair and the winter coat with the toggle buttons that Eli called his bear coat. I helped when I could. Saturday mornings, weekday evenings, the occasional overnight when Darla had plans she didn't explain and my mother needed a break. I was not the primary caregiver in those years. I want to be accurate about that. But I was there. Consistently, quietly, always there. Then my mother met Gerald Foss at a church retreat in Gatlinburg in the spring of Eli's 3rd year. Gerald was a retired contractor from Chattanooga with a boat, a timeshare in Destin, Florida, and a habit of calling women sweetheart in a way that was meant to sound warm but landed somewhere closer to dismissive. My mother married him 11 months later in a ceremony at First Presbyterian that Darla was maid of honor for and I attended as a guest. After the wedding, things shifted. Gerald did not want to raise a grandchild. He was polite about it. He never said it directly. But the message moved through my mother like weather. You could feel it before it arrived. The Saturday morning help became less available. The overnight stays became my responsibility. Darla, who had started a new relationship with a man in Nashville, began spending more weekends there. Eli started spending more weekends with me. I was 24 by then. I had finished my associate's degree, transferred to the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, completed my bachelor's in child development, and taken a position as a lead teacher at the Cornerstone Early Learning Center in Knoxville, where I had worked my way up from assistant teacher over 3 years. I had a 2-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of a building on Sutherland Avenue. It was not large. The kitchen window looked out onto the parking lot. The radiator clicked every night from October to March. But it was mine, and I had made it into something that felt like a home. Bookshelves along one wall, a rug I found at an estate sale in Alcoa, a kitchen table with 4 chairs even though it was just me. Eli had a drawer in my bedroom dresser from the time he was 4. A small drawer, second from the bottom, where I kept a spare set of pajamas, a toothbrush, and the 2 picture books he liked best. By the time he was 5, the drawer had become a shelf, and the shelf had become a corner of the 2nd bedroom that I had slowly, quietly, without announcing it to anyone, turned into a space that was his. I did not set out to become Eli's primary caregiver. It happened the way most important things happen, gradually, then completely. By the spring of Eli's 5th year, he was with me 4 nights a week. By summer, it was 5. Darla was in Nashville more than Maryville. She called. She visited on Sundays when she could. She was not absent, but she was not present in the way a child needs someone to be present. Eli knew my voice the way he knew his own name. He knew which cabinet I kept the cereal in. He knew that I checked for monsters under the bed by knocking on the floor 3 times and saying all clear, and that this was a ritual and rituals were how you knew the world was still in order. In January of the year Eli turned 6, Darla called me on a Wednesday night at 9:47 p.m. I remember the time because I had just put Eli to bed. He had been with me for 11 days straight while Darla sorted out what she called a situation in Nashville, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold beside me. She said, "Addie, I need to tell you something and I need you to not be angry." I was not angry. I was something quieter than angry. Something more like recognition. She said she was moving to Nashville permanently. She said the man she was with had an apartment and a stable job and she thought it was the right thing for her. She said she wanted Eli to come with her but she needed a few months to get settled first. She said she knew I would understand. I asked her what she meant by a few months. She said she wasn't sure. Maybe 6. Maybe a little longer. I told her I would take care of Eli. I told her I would keep him safe and in school and that she should call him every day and that when she was ready, we would figure out the next steps together. She said, "You're the only person I trust with him. Addie. You know that, right? I said I knew. She moved to Nashville on February 8th. She called Eli every day for the first 2 weeks, then every other day, then twice a week. By summer, it was Sundays. Eli never complained. He was a child who had learned very early to take what was offered and be grateful for it. That broke my heart in a way I did not know how to talk about. I want to pause here for a moment, because I think some of you watching right now know exactly what I mean when I say that. You know what it is to watch a child learn to expect less. To watch them adjust their hope downward, quietly, without making a scene, because making a scene has never gotten them anything. If you've ever loved a child who had to do that, type the word enough in the comments. Because every child deserves someone who tells them they are enough. Every single one. And if you're that person for someone right now, I want you to know that work matters. Even when no one sees it. Even when no one says thank you. It matters. Now, back to the story. I filed for legal guardianship of Eli in September of that year. I did it with the help of a family law attorney named Patricia Odom, who had an office on Gay Street in Knoxville and a way of explaining legal documents that made them feel like plain speech. Patricia was 51, practical, and had handled enough family court cases to have developed what I can only describe as a very specific kind of patience. The kind that comes from watching people be surprised by consequences they chose. Darla signed the guardianship paperwork voluntarily. She signed it on a Sunday afternoon in Patricia's office, with Eli in the waiting room drawing on a legal pad, and she cried while she signed it, which I think was real. I think the grief was real. I think she loved him and could not figure out how to be what he needed, and those two things were both true at the same time. My mother did not know about the guardianship filing until it was finalized. I had not told her because I had learned, over 30 years of being her daughter, that telling her things in advance gave her time to position herself against them. The guardianship was finalized on October 22nd. I called her that evening. She was quiet for 11 seconds. I counted. And then she said, "You should have talked to me first." I said Eli needed stability. I gave him stability. She said, "He has family, Adaline." I said, "He does. He lives with me." That was the beginning of what I can only describe as a slow campaign. It did not happen all at once. It happened the way erosion happens, steadily, invisibly, until one day you look up and the ground has shifted. Over the following 14 months, my mother called Darla regularly. I know this because Darla told me, in one of our Sunday phone calls, that Mom had been asking questions. I know this because my mother began making comments at family gatherings, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Eli's birthday, comments that were framed as concern but functioned as inventory. How often does he see his pediatrician? Whether he was in the right school? Whether my apartment was large enough? Whether I was managing my situation? A phrase she used to describe my life the way you might describe a problem that hasn't been solved yet. I was managing, for the record. I had been promoted to program director at Cornerstone by then. I had a salary that covered our expenses with room left over. I had moved us into a 3-bedroom house on a quiet street in North Knoxville, a rental, with a yard that backed up to a greenbelt. Eli had his own room, his own bookshelf, his own collection of river stones on the windowsill. He was in first grade at Beaumont Magnet Academy, where his teacher, Mrs. Holcomb, told me at the October conference that he was one of the most curious readers she had seen in 15 years of teaching. I kept that sentence. I wrote it down in a small notebook I had started keeping, a record of Eli's life, his milestones, his appointments, his school reports, his medical visits. Every date, every detail, labeled and organized in a green 3-ring binder I kept on the shelf above my desk. Rosemary died in April. She had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer the previous October and had declined quickly, the way that particular illness tends to do, without much warning and without much mercy. I drove to Maryville every weekend from November through March. I sat with her in the stone house while Biscuit slept on the arm of the sofa. We talked about books and about Eli and about what she called the long view, the idea that most things that feel catastrophic in the short term turn out to be clarifying in the long term. 3 weeks before she died, she took my hand and said, "I've taken care of something for you. You won't know what it is until you need it. But when you need it, you'll know." I asked her what she meant. She smiled. She had her mother's cheekbones and her father's eyes and 31 years of reading human nature in a high school classroom. She said, "The people who try to shrink you have already decided you're bigger than they can handle. Don't forget that." She died on April 11th, at 7:22 in the morning, in her own bed, with the window open and the garden coming back to life outside. I did not learn about the envelope until 2 months later, when her attorney, a man named Douglas Friels who had handled her affairs for 20 years, called me on a Thursday afternoon and asked me to come to his office in Maryville at my earliest convenience. I went on a Saturday. I sat across from Douglas Friels in an office that smelled like cedar and old paper, and he slid a sealed envelope across the desk. My name was written on the front in Rosemary's handwriting. Below my name, in smaller letters, "To be opened when the time comes." I held it for a moment. I did not open it there. I put it in my bag and drove home and sat at the kitchen table until Eli came in from the backyard and asked what we were having for dinner. And I said spaghetti, and he said good because spaghetti was his favorite, and I put the envelope in the drawer beside my bed and made dinner and did not open it that night. I opened it 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening after Eli was asleep. Inside was a letter from Rosemary, 4 pages in her careful cursive, and a separate document, a notarized affidavit, dated 14 months before her death, witnessed by Douglas Friels and a licensed social worker named Karen Whittle. The affidavit was a detailed account. 14 months of observation, documented with the precision of a woman who had spent 31 years grading papers and knew exactly how evidence worked. It documented the pattern of my mother's behavior toward me since childhood. It documented specific incidents, dates, conversations, the names of witnesses. It documented my mother's treatment of Darla versus her treatment of me. It documented what Rosemary had observed during Eli's first 2 years of life, when she had been present at family gatherings and had watched my mother redirect, minimize, and undercut my role in Eli's care. It was not a weapon. That is important to understand. Rosemary had not written it as a weapon. She had written it as a record. The way I kept the green binder. The way I had always understood, on some cellular level, that documentation was the only thing that stood between the truth and someone else's version of it. The letter ended, "You have always been the person who showed up." I want someone to have written that down. I love you, Addie. Don't shrink. I put the letter and the affidavit back in the envelope. I put the envelope in the drawer beside my bed. I went to sleep. 2 months later, my mother filed a petition for custody of Eli. I want to say that again so it lands properly. My mother, who had moved to Chattanooga with Gerald Foss, who had not been Eli's primary caregiver in over 2 years, who had visited him 4 times in the preceding 12 months, who had never once asked to be named his legal guardian when Darla was struggling, who had shown no interest in the daily architecture of his life, filed a petition for custody of a 7-year-old child who had been sleeping in my house for 2.5 years. The petition cited concerns about my lifestyle, my financial stability, and what she called my inability to provide a traditional family structure. She had retained an attorney named Harold Birch, who had a practice in Maryville and a reputation for taking cases that other attorneys considered long shots. She had submitted 4 pages of typed documentation. She had 2 character witnesses, a woman from First Presbyterian named Carolyn Haverford and my mother's neighbor in Chattanooga, a man named Dale something who had met Eli exactly once. She had retained a family therapist named Dr. Kessler, who had conducted 2 sessions with my mother and submitted a letter of support. She did not have Darla's cooperation. That is the first thing I want to tell you. When Patricia Odom called Darla in Nashville and explained what was happening, Darla said, and I am quoting from Patricia's notes, which I have read, "My mother has no right to do this. Adaline is Eli's guardian. I signed those papers. My mother needs to stop." Darla submitted a written statement to the court in support of my guardianship. She also offered to testify in person if necessary. I want you to hold on to that detail, because it matters. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in October. I arrived at the Granger County Family Court at 8:45 a.m. With Patricia Odom beside me, a green 3-ring binder under my arm, and Rosemary's envelope, now inside a clear protective sleeve, in the front pocket of the binder. I wore a dark blue blazer and flat shoes and my hair pulled back, and I did not feel afraid. I want to be precise about that. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. Something in me had gone very still, the way it goes still when you have been preparing for something for a long time and the moment has finally arrived. My mother was already seated when we entered the courtroom. She was wearing a cream-colored blazer and pearl earrings. Gerald was beside her. Harold Birch sat to her left with his own binder, thicker than mine but not, I would discover, more organized. The judge was a woman named the Honorable Sandra Tillman. She had been on the family court bench for 14 years. She had short gray hair and reading glasses on a chain and the kind of face that had seen enough family court proceedings to be genuinely unimpressed by performance. My mother's attorney spoke first. He outlined the petition. He used words like concern and traditional stability and the child's best interests in a way that was clearly rehearsed. He submitted the 4-page document, the therapist's letter, and the affidavits from Carolyn Haverford and Dale something. He spoke for 11 minutes. Judge Tillman listened. She made notes. She did not react. Then my mother was invited to make a statement. She stood. She smoothed her blazer. She looked at the judge and said, in a voice I had heard my entire childhood, composed, reasonable, performing concern, Your Honor, I love my grandson. I have always loved him. I am asking this court to consider whether a single woman in a rental property, without a spouse, without family nearby, is truly the best environment for a growing boy. I am his grandmother. I have a stable home, a husband, a house with a yard. I am asking for the chance to give him the family structure he deserves. She did not look at me when she said it. Judge Tillman said, Thank you, Mrs. Foss. Then Patricia stood. I want to pause here for a moment, because I know some of you watching right now have been in a room where someone told a story about you that wasn't true. Where someone used careful, reasonable-sounding words to describe you in a way that made you feel like a problem to be solved. Where the person doing it looked perfectly composed and you had to sit there and not react, not flinch, not give them the satisfaction of seeing you break. If you know that feeling, and I think a lot of you do, type the words I know in the comments. Because I see you. And I want you to know that staying calm in that moment is not weakness. It is the hardest and most powerful thing you will ever do. Now, back to the story. Patricia Odom stood and said, Your Honor, the petitioner has characterized my client's home as lacking in stability. I'd like to address that characterization with documentation. She submitted the green binder. The binder contained, in order, a copy of the finalized guardianship order, signed by a Knoxville family court judge 26 months prior and voluntarily consented to by Eli's biological mother, 26 months of pediatric records from Dr. Marcus Webb at Pediatric Associates of Knoxville, showing consistent well-child visits, current vaccinations, no missed appointments, Eli's school records from Beaumont Magnet Academy, including attendance, for absences in 2 academic years, all excused, and the written assessment from Mrs. Holcomb, a letter from Eli's school counselor, submitted voluntarily, describing Eli as emotionally secure, socially engaged, and clearly attached to his primary caregiver, a record of the petitioner's visits with Eli over the preceding 12 months. 4 visits, documented by date, a record of my income and housing costs, showing financial stability, and Darla's written statement, notarized, submitted in full. Patricia presented each item calmly, in order, with the tab number. She did not editorialize. She did not raise her voice. She stated facts and let the facts speak. Harold Birch objected twice. Judge Tillman overruled him both times. Then Patricia said, Your Honor, I have one additional item to submit. It was prepared by the late Rosemary Marsh, The petitioner's older sister and my client's aunt, who passed away in April of this year. It is a notarized affidavit, witnessed by attorney Douglas Friels of Maryville, Tennessee, and licensed social worker Karen Whittle. I would ask the court to receive it into evidence. Judge Tillman said, "Proceed." Patricia removed the envelope from the clear sleeve and passed it to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. Judge Tillman opened it. She read it. She read it for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. I counted. My mother did not know what was in that envelope. I watched her face. I watched the moment she understood that something she could not control had just entered the room. Her jaw tightened. Her hands, which had been folded on the table in front of her, separated. She leaned toward Harold Birch and said something low that I could not hear. Judge Tillman set the affidavit down. She looked at my mother over her reading glasses. She said, "Mrs. Foss, this affidavit was prepared by a woman who observed your family over a period of 14 months and documented specific incidents and patterns of behavior. I am going to ask you directly, is there anything in this document that you wish to contest?" My mother said, That document was prepared by my sister, who was ill and..." Judge Tillman said, "I understand. Is there anything specific in the document that is factually inaccurate?" Silence. 4 seconds. 5. My mother said, "I don't believe this is relevant to the question of my grandson's welfare." Judge Tillman said, "I'll make that determination." She read for another 2 minutes. Then she removed her reading glasses and set them on the bench in front of her. She said, "I've reviewed the petitioner's filing and the respondent's documentation. I've reviewed the guardianship order, the child's medical and educational records, the biological mother's statement, and the affidavit submitted by the late Rosemary Marsh." She paused. The petitioner has not demonstrated a material change in circumstances that would justify modification of the existing guardianship arrangement. The child's current placement reflects 26 months of consistent, documented, appropriate care. The petitioner's concerns about family structure are noted but are not, in this court's assessment, sufficient grounds to disrupt an arrangement that is clearly serving this child's best interests. She looked at my mother directly. She said, "Petition denied." My mother did not make a sound. Gerald put his hand on her arm. Harold Birch began shuffling papers. The room was very quiet. My hands were flat on the table in front of me. I noticed that they were not shaking. I noticed that my breathing was even. I noticed that I felt something I can only describe as the absence of fear. Not triumph, not relief exactly, but the particular stillness that comes when something you have been bracing for finally passes and you are still standing. Patricia gathered the binder. I put Rosemary's envelope back in the clear sleeve and put it in the front pocket. We stood. We thanked the judge. We walked out of the courtroom and into the corridor, and Patricia said, quietly, "That was 14 minutes of the most organized evidence presentation I have had in a family court case in 22 years. Your aunt was extraordinary." I said, "She was." I did not speak to my mother that day. She was still in the courtroom when we left. I heard later, from a cousin who was not involved in any of this, that she cried in the parking lot for 40 minutes. I don't say that with satisfaction. I say it because I think she was grieving something. Not Eli, exactly, but the version of herself she had always believed in. The one who was the authority. The one who decided how things went. That version had just been contradicted by a dead woman's handwriting and 26 months of pediatric records. Gerald filed for divorce 8 months later. I learned that from the same cousin. I don't know the details and I didn't ask. Darla came to Knoxville for Eli's birthday in March. She stayed for 4 days. She slept on the pullout in the living room and helped Eli build a model of a volcano for his science fair project and took him to the dollar store and let him pick out anything he wanted. He picked a package of googly eyes and a plastic dinosaur and a notebook with a rocket ship on the cover. She cried when she left, at the door, with Eli's arms around her waist. She said, "I love you, Bug." He said, "I know, Mom." He said it the way children say things they have made peace with. Simply, without accusation. After she drove away, he came inside and asked if we could have grilled cheese for dinner. I said yes. He sat at the kitchen table and drew in his rocket ship notebook while I made the sandwiches, and the radiator clicked, and the afternoon light came through the kitchen window at the angle it always does in March, and everything was ordinary and quiet and exactly right. That is the part of this story that I think about the most. Not the courtroom. Not the envelope. Not my mother's face when she understood what was in it. I think about the grilled cheese. I think about the river stones on the windowsill. I think about the drawer that became a shelf that became a room. I think about the fact that Eli knows which cabinet the cereal is in and that the floor-knocking ritual means all clear and that some things are worth keeping. Rosemary used to say that family is not the people who claim you. Family is the people who show up on the ordinary days. Not the holidays, not the milestones, not the events that get photographed and framed. The ordinary Tuesdays. The grilled cheese. The science fair volcanoes. The googly eyes from the dollar store. I have a green binder on the shelf above my desk. It has Eli's whole life in it. Every appointment, every school report, every note from a teacher who saw something worth seeing in him. I add to it every few months. Not because I expect another courtroom. I add to it because I am a person who keeps records, and because records are how you prove that something happened, that it was real, that someone was there. Rosemary kept a record too. 14 months of watching, 14 months of writing it down in her careful cursive, because she understood, the way she understood most things, that the truth needs a witness. That it is not enough to know what happened. Someone has to have written it down. I think about her every day. I think about her when Eli comes home from school and hangs his backpack on the hook by the door. I think about her when he reads to himself at the kitchen table, his lips moving slightly the way they do when he's concentrating. I think about her when he adds a new stone to the windowsill collection and holds it up to the light to see what color it turns. She wrote, "You have always been the person who showed up." I intend to keep being that person. For as long as he needs me. For as long as I'm standing. If you are watching this and you have been the person who showed up for a child, for a sibling, for anyone who needed someone steady, I want you to know that your consistency is not invisible. Even when it feels like no one is watching, someone always is. Sometimes it's a child who will carry it for the rest of his life. Sometimes it's an aunt who writes it down in careful cursive and leaves it with her attorney in a sealed envelope. And sometimes, in a quiet courtroom on a Thursday morning in October, 14 minutes is enough. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Tell me about the person who showed up for you, or the person you've shown up for. I read every single one. Hit subscribe if this story meant something to you, and share it with someone who needs to hear that documentation is not vengeance. It is dignity. It is saying, this happened, and I was here, and I kept the record. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.